From the Oregon State University's Extension Service, you are listening to In the Woods with the Forestry and Natural Resources Program. This podcast brings the forest to listeners by sharing the stories and voices of forest scientists, land managers, and enthusiastic members of the public. Each episode, we will bring you research and science-based information that aims to offer some insight into what we know and are still learning about forest science and management. Stick around to discover a new topic related to forests on each episode.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, to In the Woods podcast, presented by the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension Program at Oregon State University. I'm Jacob Putney, Extension Agent in Baker and Grant counties, and your host for today's episode. I'm very happy to be joined by my FNR colleague and fellow podcast host, Scott Levengood. Scott is the Wood Products Extension Specialist with the OSU Forestry and Natural Resource Program. And Scott, it's really great to see you. Great. Thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jake. Pleasure as always to be working on this podcast.
So today we're going to be talking about a new lumber grading training program that Scott has been developing that came out of the last legislative session. So this program is going to provide certification for small scale sawmillers to grade the lumber they milled to be used for building. So Scott, I've been hearing a lot of interest from folks that have heard about this program, especially here in Northeast Oregon, that this training is going to be provided by OSU.
That's right. And yeah, absolutely. And I'm hearing a lot of interest too, since this really is, like you said, it's brand new. But I think for our listeners' benefit, I think a little context might be helpful. So to put it simply, if you're going to build a structure in Oregon using lumber, the lumber needs to be graded. In other words, it's got to be evaluated to determine its structural capabilities. And the proof that's been done is a grade stamp somewhere on the lumber. So for example, you might see a stamp that says 2 and BTR, which means grade 2 or better. Or said another way, the board is at least a grade 2, might be higher grade. And building inspectors are going to look to ensure those stamps are there when examining the structure.
So when you say grade stamps, what exactly is that stamp and who applies it?
The grade stamps are an actual physical mark. It's usually an ink mark, or more increasingly, it might be, say, printed by like a laser printer. And they're applied at sawmills by trained and certified lumber graders. And the graders are trained to visually inspect each board for features like knots, splits, decay, whether or not the boards conform to the size standards, and then they assign the appropriate grade. And increasingly, like a lot of things, this grading is often being done automatically by machines that are equipped with lasers and cameras and other kinds of sensors like that.
So the sawmills are applying this grade stamp. How do they go about getting the training to be able to grade this lumber? Do they train their own employees, or how does that work?
Yeah, good question. The training and the system as a whole is managed by an independent third party. And specifically, there are several grading agencies that train the graders. And the agencies themselves are accredited by the American Lumber Standard Committee. And I should mention here as well that the grade stamps themselves, they actually belong to the grading agencies, not the sawmills. So the person doing the grading may be employed by the sawmill, but the stamp they're using belongs to a grading agencies. And so these grading agencies will come by and do monthly spot inspections of the graders at sawmills to ensure they're grading accurately. And in fact, if they find that they're not grading accurately, the agency can actually remove the mill's stamp.
Oh.
And that's a really bad deal for sawmills, since the grade stamps are essential for a mill to be able to sell structural lumber. The system as a whole, for training, inspections, revising grades, lumber strength testing, etc., of course, it all comes at a cost. And pertinent to our discussion today, for small sawmills, this cost can be pretty prohibitive.
Right, cost. But actually, so when, say, a board isn't graded correctly, who then carries the liability? Would it be the sawmill or the bureau, or the person individually that graded it?
Yeah, so I think so if there's ever going to be a lawsuit, say somebody injured on a job site due to faulty lumber that failed and wasn't graded properly, somebody's going to look for compensation there, and they will most likely go after both the agency and the mill themselves and find who was at fault. Yeah.
I guess with all that context, to get to the point of today's episode today, let's talk about the training that's now being developed in Oregon.
Yeah, last July, Oregon legislature passed Senate Bill 1061, also known as the Oregon Forest to Homes Act. And this bill required that the OSU Extension Service would develop a lumber grading program for small mill operators. But as it turns out, we in Oregon don't have to blaze trail here. New Hampshire's been offering training like this for 30 years, Wisconsin for 17 years, and more recently, Tennessee and Alaska have developed such programs, and I'm sure there are programs in other states as well that I'm just not aware of. So we do have the advantage of being able to benchmark these other states' efforts and copy what's worked well, and of course, change the things that they discovered didn't work very well after years of trying it out. So yeah, more specifically, the OSU Extension Service is going to offer trainings at least once a year in various locations around the state. The trainings are going to be 1 day in duration. Participants are going to learn how to grade lumber with simplified rules for the key softwood species that we use here in Oregon, which is Douglas fir, western hemlock, true fir species like white fir, grand fir, etc.
What are some of the things that they'll be able to do? And then I assume there's going to be some limitations of where and how lumber grade is used.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as you might expect, there are actually quite a few limitations. First, the lumber is to be graded by the person that sawed the lumber, and then it's to be sold directly to the homeowner or the home builder. So there's this very tight chain of custody there. And second, it's only applicable for 1 and 2 family detached dwellings. And in practice, what that means is the lumber graded in this way can be used for light frame construction where there's lots of repetitive members. And to think about that, it'd be like 2x4s or 2x6s that are spaced every 16 or 24 inches in a wall frame. Or I could say that another way, and what's excluded from the program in that category then are large beams and timbers like you might use in a timber frame structure. And there's going to be just 3 grades, number 2 and better, stud grade, and then a number 3.
Okay. I'm curious, and what are some of the other grades that, say, like a larger scale sawmill and then someone trained by the Bureau could be able to grade then? I'm just not familiar with some of these grades.
Yeah, so you'll have high grades like select structural number 1, and those would be included in this grading category under number 2 and better.
Okay.
So you can have those higher grades in there as well. And then there's construction, utility, economy, very low grades that really aren't intended for structural use. They would be intended for things like pallets and crating. And there's no reason for us to include those grades in this. So if it doesn't, essentially, if somebody's grading lumber through this program and it doesn't meet the minimum of a number 3, the lowest grade for this program, it goes to the firewood pile or for crating or pallets. It does not apply for structural use.
Gotcha. So folks can take the training, and then how do they get certified then? Do they just have to take the training? Do they need to pass a test?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll spend time in these workshops talking about identifying the key features that they have to examine, like knot, splits, decay, warp, how to measure these features relative to the published grading rules that we've developed. And then there will be a hands-on test to apply those rules to a set of lumber that will truck around with us to all the courses. So those who pass the hands-on test then will receive their certificate.
Okay, so they take the training, they practice, they pass the test, they receive their certificate, and then they get a grade stamp?
No, glad you brought that up. That's another limitation I should have mentioned in your earlier question. Participants in this program do not get stamps and are not allowed to apply any grade stamp or any mark to the lumber they grade. The idea is we don't want to confuse lumber graded in this manner with the lumber that's being graded by a certified lumber grader from an accredited lumber grading agency. Those graders have gone through far more rigorous training and have their skills assessed quite often. This program and all the other states do the same thing that have these programs. No grade stamp on there, just a piece of paper certifying that the person has passed this training and it's local use lumber.
Okay, but that lumber is used and then it gets inspected. How will they know that it has been graded if there's no stamp?
Yeah, the people trained by the system are going to provide the buyer with a document stating the volume of lumber, the sizes, the species, the actual grade. So whether it's 2 and better, stud or grade 3, the surface condition, if it's been surface smooth, a moisture content of the lumber they're selling. So it's all on a form, a piece of paper, and then they'll provide a copy of their certificate of completion of the course as well. And that's the documentation that the Oregon building inspectors are going to be looking for when they're looking at lumber graded this way.
Okay, and then taking maybe a step back here, thinking like, who is responsible for those rules that of what can and cannot be accepted as graded from the building inspector standpoint?
Yeah, we've actually, again, being fortunate enough to follow the lead of several other states, and they have developed simplified and more conservative grading rules based on published lumber grading standards that are already out there now. And so they have less to look at. So the lumber graded in this manner is going to be following rules for how much wane or missing
Hmm.
surface area, how big the splits can be, how big the knots can be, but in a simplified form so that we're using the published standards, but making it a bit easier for somebody who's only going to do a 1-day training.
Yeah. Okay. And then will there be any continuing education or anything like that to maintain certification, or is it
There,
just
yeah, there will be every 5 years. So
every
the
five?
training is good for 5 years, and then they have to come back in. And more than likely, I think we'll see happen rather than somebody coming in and sitting through the training again, if they've been doing this for the last five
Yeah.
years since they got trained, they're just going to come in and hang out for the test portion of it and go through a
Okay.
stack of lumber again and
Yeah.
renew their certificate for the next 5 years.
Yeah. Unless there's any other changes and stuff to different rules.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And so, thinking about the programs that have been around for a long time, what kind of challenges did they face, and maybe what kind of changes did they see over time? I'm sure you worked with a lot of those folks as you were putting this one together for Oregon.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, timing wise here on April 1st, I had the opportunity to go to Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is the one I've been watching for years. And they did their 1-day training just outside of Madison on April 1st. So I got to see firsthand how the training is conducted and to talk to their trainers to say what sort of things work, what sort of things don't work. Make sure you bring small test specimens that show the knot size of a knot relative to the width of the board. They had warped boards, so we learned how to measure warp. I'm trying to think of what else they've done. Some of the just visual graphics that people have and a stepwise flow chart to you've got a board in front of you. What are the things you look for first? You don't have to consider all of the criteria. For example, if a 2x4 has a 2.5 inch knot on the edge of it, it's already down probably in the economy grade and non-structural. You don't,
Hmm.
there's no point in measuring the warp, etc. So just those kind of streamlined activities, and that's what trained lumber graders do anyway. They don't have to look at every criteria. They look at the most limiting feature and then go on from
Okay.
there. And just being able to communicate that to people in the training is going to be important.
Yeah. Okay. So I imagine some of our listeners are probably interested in participating in these trainings. So want to know maybe when, where, what's the cost, how soon are these trainings going to roll out?
Yeah, actually, we're planning 2 locations for this October. October 5th at the Extension office in LeGrand, and then October 8th at the Extension office in Roseburg. Anticipating there may be a bit of pent-up interest in this training since it is brand new, and I've been hearing about it for 20 years. People have been asking, when are we going to do this? We've also set aside a second day in each of those locations. So October 6th for a second session in LeGrand, and then October 9th for the second session in Roseburg. We're limiting participation to 20 people per session just because there's going to be enough hands-on stuff and moving lumber around. Having a bigger crowd could be tough. And then if those dates and locations aren't good for people, we'll have trainings again in the spring. Haven't yet determined the locations or dates yet, but there will be $100 fee per person, and the sessions are going to run 8 to 5 each day. And participants will take the hands-on test, and if they pass, they'll get their certificate right there on the spot, and they'll be able to begin grading immediately.
Wow. Okay, great. So if folks are interested, how do they sign up?
Go to the Oregon Wood Innovation Center's website. In fact, just made that link active yesterday. It's May 1st when we're recording this. So the Oregon Wood Innovation Center website is owic.oregonstate.edu. When you go to that page, you'll see a picture of a house under construction. That's your cue that there's a link right beneath that picture for lumber grading. And that's going to take you to a page with more details about this program as well as links to register.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Scott. And we'll make sure to get those links on the website when this episode gets published, and as well as some of the resources associated.
Great. All right.
Scott, really great to have you here today and to talk about this program. I know a lot of folks are really looking forward to it. I had folks ever since that legislation passed started calling me almost immediately. So I had quite a growing list over the past almost a year of folks just really gearing to take that training.
It's amazing. This group must have quite a network because no word went out on my part, and I was getting questions immediately. So
Yeah.
there's a network out there. People are spreading the word. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of folks are paying attention, and yeah, as soon as that went forward, they want to know exactly when and where it was going to be.
Yep.
The
Finally
ink
got the
hadn't
date
dried
set.
yet.
That's right. Yep.
So I know we went through a lot about lumber grading in this training program. So if any questions came up while you're listening, or if you'd like to learn more about the program or these upcoming trainings, please just send us a comment or a message on our website, and we can help get you that information. Scott, as you well know, we conclude each of our episodes with our lightning round. So we might as well dive right into it with our first question. What is your favorite tree?
Yeah, my favorite tree actually is one that I started working with just immediately when I went to work for Forestry Extension at OSU, and that's the Western juniper. So my first position with OSU was based in Klamath County, and I served southern and central Oregon east of the Cascades, and just got fascinated with this tree, that just how resilient it is, naturally durable species, aromatic. Yeah, it's just there were times we saw it growing out of solid rock. It's a tree it survives, and it's just amazing. It can actually shut off. It can go partially dormant. We found, so you'd find false growth rings, and it's just an amazing tree. And the wood is incredible too.
Although you might stir some debate on whether or not a juniper is a tree.
Yeah, some shrubs out there. Yeah.
Should have rephrased that question and ask, what's your favorite wood product? You're talking to the wood products guy.
Yeah, they're one and the same in that case. Yeah.
All right. The next question is, what is the most interesting thing you bring with you in the field?
Yeah, so whenever, like you said, as a wood products person, I'm mostly going to manufacturing facilities. I always end up bringing digital calipers and a micrometer so I can do precise measurements of things like lumber thickness or panel thickness. I always bring a moisture meter. So much of the issues that people face with wood are related to moisture content or just any kind of presence of moisture in there. And then I'll often bring even just a hand lens to get a good look at something. As the structure of wood is microscopic, and the problems that people might see with warping or cracking come down to the microscopic anatomy. You've got to take a close-up look. So I feel like a crime scene investigator there with all my tools.
And then lastly, are there any other resources you'd recommend for our listeners here if they're interested in learning more about lumber grading or getting updates about future trainings? We mentioned the website, but anything else you want to mention?
I think those are really the key. So if you go to the Wood Innovation Center, the Oregon Wood Innovation Center website, lots of stuff there. But one of the other things that people might be interested in is a directory that I manage for the industry, and that's the Oregon Forest Industry Directory. And we'll just put a link on there rather than narrating out the website address for that. But yeah, there's something like 1,700 or more listings on there from landowners, log buyers, sawmills, you name it, forestry service suppliers or logging contractors and things like that are in there.
No, that's a great resource. I always reference that for folks that are looking for something specific to do whatever type of work they're interested in.
Yeah, and I think it's really critical when I talk to people in other places and they say, what is one thing you would recommend for an organization wanting to foster more connections in their forest industry in their state or nation? And I always say, got to have a directory. People need to know. People need to know who's out there and how to contact them and what they buy, what they sell. So it's really a key resource. It's over 20 years old now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I always reference folks to that directory. It's a great resource.
Yeah.
Scott, thank you again for being here today. I know this has been a lot of work over the past 9-10 months or so to get this up and running, but I know a lot of folks are looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to these trainings this fall.
Yeah, you're welcome, Jake. And that's one of the things that I think you and I get to enjoy, and anybody who works at OSU Extension Services, we're never done with lifelong learning either. So I'm doing a lot of learning to be able to teach this workshop, and it's a good experience.
Yeah, I bet. This concludes another episode of In the Woods. Thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you all next time. Bye, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.
The In the Woods podcast is produced by Lauren Grand, Jacob Putney, and Scott Levengood, who are all members of the Oregon State University Forestry and Natural Resources Extension team. Other members of the team who've been involved in the podcast include Carrie Berger, Jason O'Brien, and Stephen Fitzgerald. Episodes are edited and produced by Carrie Cantrell. Music for In the Woods was composed by Jeffrey Heino, and graphic design was created by Christina Freihoff. Funding for In the Woods is provided by Oregon State University Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, and the USDA Renewable Resources Extension Act funding. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we can't wait to talk to you again next month. Until then, what's in your woods?